The grand mahogany dining table, polished to a mirror sheen, reflected a distorted version of the scene, a tribunal, not a family dinner. On one side, the Ashworths, Richard, Eleanor, and their son Julian, sat like a panel of smug deities, their faces illuminated by the cold light of a crystal chandelier. On the other side, alone, sat Ethan. Between them, his wife Clara stood poised, a predator about to deliver the killing blow. For 5 years, Ethan had occupied this seat, an island of quiet dignity in a sea of condescending chatter. He was the family's favorite project and their greatest disappointment. They had seen him as a lump of unformed clay, a humble architect with a good heart but no ambition, whom Clara, in her infinite grace, had taken on. They had spent 60 months trying to mold him, to instill in him their values of aggressive ambition and social climbing. They had failed, and now they were done with him. Clara held a sheaf of papers, bound in a crisp, blue legal folder. Her smile, which Ethan had once found radiant, was now a cruel, thin line. "Ethan, darling," she began, her voice dripping with mock sympathy that failed to mask the triumphant glee beneath. "We need to talk." Richard Ashworth, a man whose success was matched only by his profound lack of humility, leaned forward, his knuckles white on the table. "It's past talking, Clara. It's time for action. Some of us build empires, others just take up space." He glanced pointedly at Ethan. Eleanor adjusted her pearl necklace, her expression one of pained duty, as if she were witnessing a necessary but unpleasant culling of the herd. "We just want what's best for you, dear," she murmured to her daughter, though her eyes, cold and appraising, were fixed on Ethan. Ethan said nothing. He simply watched, his gaze steady, his hands resting in his lap. He had learned long ago that silence was the only response that truly unnerved them. They expected him to shout, to plead, to break. His stillness was a language they did not speak and could not comprehend. "I'm sorry it has to be this way," Clara said, the apology utterly weightless. And then with a theatrical flourish, she tossed the folder onto the table. It slid across the polished wood, coming to a stop directly in front of his empty plate. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. "I'm divorcing you." Julian, who had been smirking into his wineglass, finally let out a short, sharp laugh. "About time," he sneered. "Maybe now we can get someone in the family with a pulse." The Ashworths thought this was the end of a long, boring chapter. They believed they were excising a benign tumor, a piece of dead weight that was holding their precious Clara back from her glorious destiny. They saw the man in the simple, off-the-rack suit, the man who drove a 5-year-old sedan, the man who spoke of designing community centers instead of chasing lucrative corporate contracts, and they saw a failure. They didn't know that his simple suit cost more than Richard's entire wardrobe, tailored from a fabric so advanced it was years from public release. They didn't know his modest car was a deliberate choice, and that in a climate-controlled garage across town sat a collection of vehicles that would make a sultan weep. They didn't know that the community centers he designed were part of a philanthropic foundation so vast it could swallow the Ashworths' provincial little empire without a trace. They saw the humble architect. They had no idea they were looking at the man who owned the city. Within 24 hours, their laughter would turn to ash in their mouths. Their world, so solid and unshakable, was about to be turned inside out by the quiet man they had so carelessly cast aside. And it would all begin with page 7. I know you're sitting there, leaning closer, feeling that familiar spark of anger and anticipation. You've seen this before, haven't you? The arrogance of people who think money and status make them invincible. You're waiting for the moment it all comes crashing down. If you love stories where the underdog reveals they were the wolf all along, then you're in the right place. Do me a favor and tap that like button so I know you're with me. And make sure you're subscribed because you won't want to miss a single second of what happens next. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let's get back to it. Let's watch them dig their own graves. The laughter in the room swelled, a chorus of derision that washed over Ethan. He didn't flinch. Instead, he picked up the folder. His fingers, long and elegant, the fingers of a creator, a builder, traced the sharp edge of the cover. He could feel the weight of it, not just the paper, but the years of accumulated slights, the thousands of tiny cuts that had led to this moment. Clara had choreographed this perfectly, a public execution of his dignity. She wanted him to feel small, worthless, and utterly alone. "Well, aren't you going to say something?" Clara prompted, her arms crossed. She was enjoying the show. This was her victory lap. Ethan slowly opened the folder. His eyes scanned the first page, the formal petition for dissolution of marriage. The language was cold, clinical. He noted the name of the law firm, Davies, Albright, and Finch, a respectable, if somewhat aggressive firm known for handling the messy affairs of the city's upper middle class. A firm that would soon regret taking this particular case. Richard cleared his throat, a sound like gravel being ground under a heel. "Listen, Ethan, let's be men about this." He leaned back, adopting the posture of a benevolent king dispensing harsh but necessary wisdom. "You were a project, an experiment. Clara has a big heart. She sees potential where there is none. But a marriage can't be a charity case forever. She needs a partner, not a passenger." "A partner who can pull his own weight," Julian added, swirling his wine. "Someone who understands that the goal is to win, not just to participate." He looked at Ethan with open contempt. "My sister deserves a winner." Ethan's gaze lifted from the papers and met Julian's. There was no anger in his eyes, only a calm, analytical curiosity. It was the look a geologist might give a common rock just before identifying it as worthless. The look made Julian shift uncomfortably in his seat. "I understand," Ethan said, his voice quiet but carrying an unexpected resonance in the suddenly silent room. The two words were not what they had expected. There was no pleading, no rage, no desperation. Eleanor, ever the pragmatist, saw an opportunity for a swift, clean amputation. "Good," she said, her tone softening fractionally. "We're glad you're being reasonable. We're prepared to be generous. Clara has suggested you can keep the apartment, and we won't go after you for her share of the equity. A parting gift for your time." The apartment, a modest two-bedroom in a respectable but unfashionable part of town. They had bought it 5 years ago, or rather Ethan had paid for it in cash, a fact he had obscured with a mortgage for appearance's sake, to maintain the fiction of his modest means. They believed it was his only significant asset. The thought was so absurd it was almost humorous. Offering him the apartment was like offering a king a handful of sand from his own desert. "That's very generous," Ethan replied, the words perfectly neutral. The dramatic irony was a physical presence in the room, a ghost only he could see. Clara, sensing her power, stepped forward again. "The papers are all there. My lawyer, Mr. Davies, says it's all very straightforward. We'll split the joint account," which she knew contained less than $10,000. "You keep your car, I'll keep mine. You get the apartment. We sign, and we're done. You can go back to your simple life." The condescension was a blunt instrument. She was not just divorcing him, she was banishing him back to what she perceived as the lower caste from which she had so magnanimously plucked him. Ethan slowly turned the pages. Each one was a testament to her blindness. Page after page of boilerplate legal text, outlining a life they had shared in name only. He saw her signature on the last page, a flamboyant, confident scrawl. He paused, his finger resting on the edge of a page deep within the document. Page 7, the addendum. The part her lawyer had likely skimmed, assuming it was irrelevant. The part Clara had never even read. He closed the folder gently. The click of the cover was definitive. He looked at Clara, and for a fleeting moment, the mask of calm slipped, and she saw a flicker of something she couldn't name. It wasn't sadness. It was something closer to pity. I'll have my lawyer review this, he said, rising from his chair. He tucked the folder under his arm. Thank you for dinner, Eleanor. Richard. He nodded to each of them, a gesture of polite finality. He didn't look at Julian. Some things were too insignificant to acknowledge. He walked towards the grand foyer, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. The Ashworths watched him go, their expressions a mixture of relief and contempt. They believed they had won. They believed the story was over. Well, Richard declared, raising his glass, that's that. To new beginnings. And to Clara for finally seeing sense. They all drank, their laughter echoing in the cavernous room. They didn't see Ethan pause at the door, his hand resting on the ornate brass handle. They didn't see him pull a small, worn leather journal from his inside pocket. He opened it, and for a moment, under the light of the foyer, the intricate, beautiful lines of a design for a new hospital wing were visible on the page. He made a small note in the margin, a tiny, precise annotation. Then he closed the book, put it away, and walked out into the night, leaving them to their celebration, utterly oblivious to the storm that was about to break over their heads. The heavy oak door of the Ashworth residence closed behind Ethan with a soft, final thud. The oppressive atmosphere of the house fell away, replaced by the cool, clean air of the autumn night. He stood on the top step of the sweeping stone staircase, the blue folder tucked neatly under his arm. For a moment he simply breathed, letting the sounds of the city, the distant hum of traffic, the whisper of wind in the manicured trees, wash over him, cleansing the lingering taint of their arrogance. He did not feel anger. Anger was a hot, messy emotion, and Ethan was a man of cool, precise calculations. What he felt was a profound sense of disappointment, a quiet grief for the woman he thought he had married, the woman who had become lost in the funhouse mirror of her family's vanity. He walked down the steps, his expensive but understated leather shoes making no sound on the stone. He bypassed the modest sedan parked near the entrance, the car he used for his Ethan, the humble architect, persona, and walked towards the far end of the long circular driveway. There, parked discreetly in the shadows of a large oak tree, was a car the Ashworths would not have recognized. It was a matte black sedan, devoid of any branding, its lines clean and severe. It was a custom-built electric vehicle, a prototype from a company he majority owned, a car that was faster, smarter, and more secure than anything on the commercial market. The door opened silently as he approached. He slid into the driver's seat, the interior smelling of rich leather and clean, recycled air. The cabin was a sanctuary of minimalist design. There were no flashing lights, no ostentatious logos, just a single, seamless pane of dark glass that ran the length of the dashboard. He placed the blue folder on the passenger seat, the garish color an insult to the car's refined palate. "Call Marcus," he said to the empty air. The dashboard display shimmered to life. A single, elegant icon appeared. A moment later, a voice, crisp and professional, came through the speakers. "Ethan, I was expecting your call. How did it go?" Marcus Thorne was more than Ethan's lawyer. He was his oldest friend, his strategic advisor, and one of the few people in the world who knew the full extent of Ethan's quiet empire. He was the bulldog to Ethan's stoic philosopher. "Exactly as we predicted," Ethan said, his voice calm as he guided the silent car out of the driveway and onto the street. The grand Ashworth mansion shrank in the rearview display, a gaudy monument to hollow pride. The papers were served, at dinner, with the entire family present for the spectacle. There was a pause on the other end. "Theatrical," Marcus said, a note of distaste in his voice. "I hope you're all right." "I'm fine, Marcus. This was a necessary step, a final data point." Ethan's mind worked like that. He collected information, observed patterns, and made decisions based on evidence. His marriage had been the ultimate long-term study. "They believe I'm destitute. They've generously offered me the apartment." Marcus let out a short, humorless laugh. How magnanimous of them. The apartment you bought as a strategic write-off for the foundation. Did they mention the joint account with the $9,400 in it? They did. They believe it's our life savings, Ethan confirmed. The city lights began to streak past, painting the night in strokes of gold and neon. He was not heading towards the small apartment he shared with Clara. He was heading downtown, towards the clouds. Good. Their ignorance is our greatest asset, Marcus said. I've reviewed the preliminary filing they sent over. It's amateur hour, Ethan. Standard, boilerplate stuff. They've listed your profession as junior architect at Peterson and Kale. I haven't worked at Peterson and Kale in 4 years, Ethan stated. He had for a time. It was a brief, early chapter, part of his experiment in living an ordinary life. I know, Marcus said. They don't. They've also completely overlooked the prenuptial agreement. Clara refused to sign one, Ethan corrected gently. She said it was unromantic, that she trusted me. She refused to sign the one I drafted for you, the one that would have protected her, Marcus clarified. She didn't know you had already placed 99% of your assets into the E. Vance irrevocable trust 2 years before you even met her. A trust that, for legal purposes, is an entirely separate entity, an entity which, according to the addendum I helped you sneak into their own divorce filing, is considered a premarital asset. Ethan guided the car into a private, underground garage beneath the tallest, most exclusive residential tower in the city. The gate slid open, recognizing his vehicle. Did you enjoy writing that addendum, Marcus? It was some of my finest work, Marcus admitted, a rare note of pride in his voice. Legally dense, utterly boring, and buried between schedule of shared furnishings and pet custody agreements. They'll never read it, not until it's too late. Ethan parked in a spot marked Penthouse 1. He picked up the blue folder. They hired Davies, Albright, and Finch. Davies is a shark, but he's a professional, Marcus mused. He's arrogant, but he's not stupid. When he sees what's on page 7, he'll understand the position he's in. He'll understand that his client has declared war on a sovereign nation with a water pistol. Ethan stepped out of the car and walked towards a private elevator. Set the meeting for Friday, their office. I want them on their home turf. It will make the collapse more dramatic. Consider it done, Marcus said. Ethan, are you sure about this? We could just let it go. Give them the divorce they want and walk away. You don't need to do this. Ethan paused, his thumb on the elevator's call button. He thought of Clara's laugh, Richard's sneer, the years of quiet condescension. But more than that, he thought of the principle. He had given them every opportunity to see him, the real him, beyond the superficial shell he had constructed. He had waited for a single moment of genuine connection, of loyalty, of defense. It had never come. This isn't about revenge, Marcus, Ethan said, his voice soft. It's about balance. It's about a world where actions have consequences. They built this house of cards. I'm just going to introduce a gentle breeze. He stepped into the elevator, the doors hissing shut, and ascended towards his silent, empty kingdom in the sky. The mood at the Ashworth residence was buoyant, almost giddy. The moment Ethan's car had disappeared down the street, it was as if a heavy gray cloud had been lifted, allowing the brilliant sun of their self-satisfaction to shine through. Richard had produced a bottle of vintage champagne, a bottle he claimed he had been saving for a special occasion. This, apparently, qualified. A toast, he bellowed, filling Clara's glass to the brim. To my daughter, for her courage, her decisiveness, and for finally taking out the trash. Clara laughed, a genuine, unrestrained sound this time. The performance was over. She felt a profound sense of relief, of liberation. She had done it. She had cut the cord. To freedom, she declared, raising her glass. I still can't believe he was so calm, Julian said, shaking his head with a mixture of confusion and contempt. No shouting, no begging, he just folded, Pathetic. What did you expect? Richard scoffed, taking a large swallow of champagne. Men like him have no fight in them. They're born to be followers, worker bees. He knew he was outmatched. He knew he couldn't win against us. Eleanor, who had been quietly observing, finally offered her analysis. He was probably relieved. The pressure of being associated with our family was clearly too much for him. He can go back to his little drawings and his simple friends now. Everyone is better off. Clara sat on the arm of a plush velvet sofa, sipping her champagne. Her mind was already racing ahead, planning her new life. She had already been discreetly seeing someone else for the past few months. Mark, a vice president at a rival development firm. He was everything Ethan wasn't. Ambitious, flashy, aggressive. He understood the game. He was a winner. What about the divorce? Julian asked, ever practical when it came to money. Davies is going to fleece him, right? There's nothing to fleece, Clara said with a wave of her hand. That's the beauty of it. It's simple. He gets the apartment because I'm a good person. We split the 10 grand in the bank. He keeps his pathetic car. It'll be done in a month. Mr. Davies said he's never seen a cleaner break. Richard nodded in approval. Good. No messy court battles. We have a reputation to maintain. The important thing is that it's over. Clara, you're free to build a life with someone who can actually contribute to it. Someone who can help elevate the Ashworth name, not drag it down. The implication was clear. Her marriage to Ethan had been a strategic misstep, a blemish on the family's otherwise pristine record of upward mobility. Now, that error was being corrected. Mark's firm is trying to land the new Westfield Tower contract, Clara said, a dreamy look in her eyes. He says if he gets it, he'll be on the board within a year. Westfield Tower? Richard's interest was piqued. That's a huge project. The architecture contract alone must be worth a fortune. Who's the architect on that? I don't know, Clara said, shrugging. Some reclusive genius no one's ever seen. They call him Vance. Mark says he's impossible to get a meeting with. The name hung in the air for a moment, meaningless to them, a random piece of business trivia. The dramatic irony was so thick it could have been cut with a knife. They were discussing Ethan's flagship project, the crowning achievement of his anonymous career, the very project that had made him one of the most powerful and sought-after architects on the planet. They spoke his secret name without a hint of recognition. Well, that's the kind of man you should be with, Eleanor said approvingly. Someone who moves in those circles, not someone who thinks designing a homeless shelter is a noble calling. The family spent the next hour basking in their collective arrogance. They dissected Ethan's every perceived flaw, his quiet nature, which they interpreted as weakness, his simple tastes, which they saw as a lack of aspiration, his moral principles, which they viewed as a crippling handicap in the real world. They were like hyenas, picking apart a carcass, unaware that the lion was watching from a nearby hill, patiently waiting for the dawn. As the evening wound down, Clara felt a surge of pure, unadulterated confidence. Her future seemed bright and limitless. She had shed the dead weight. She had a new, powerful man waiting in the wings. Her family, the only people whose opinions truly mattered, was fully behind her. She went to bed that night in the sprawling master suite, the king-size bed feeling wonderfully empty. She sent a quick text to Mark. It's done. I'm free. His reply was instantaneous. My brilliant, ruthless girl. Dinner tomorrow to celebrate? Clara smiled and typed back, perfect. She fell asleep with a smile on her face, dreaming of towers of glass and steel, of corporate triumphs and social victories. She was utterly secure in her world, completely blind to the fact that the foundations of that world were about to be systematically dismantled by the quiet, pathetic man she had just so confidently discarded. The reckoning was coming, and she was sleeping soundly, oblivious on the eve of her own destruction. The conference room at Davies, Albright, and Finch was a study in calculated intimidation. A long, dark mahogany table sat under a recessed spotlight, creating a theatrical, interrogative glare. On one wall, a collection of framed degrees from Ivy League law schools. On the other, a floor-to-ceiling window offered a panoramic view of the city, a view that subtly suggested its occupants were masters of all they surveyed. Clara, Richard, and their lawyer, Mr. Davies, were seated and waiting. Clara looked radiant, dressed in a sharp, crimson power suit. She felt confident, invigorated. This was not a painful divorce proceeding. It was the formal ratification of her victory. Richard sat beside her, exuding an aura of paternalistic power, his hands steepled on the table as if he were chairing a board meeting. Mr. Davies, a man in his late 50s with silver hair and a perpetually skeptical expression, shuffled his papers. He was the picture of expensive competence. He had handled 100 divorces like this. They were always a bit messy, a bit emotional, but ultimately predictable. The party with the money and the power always won. In his mind, this was an open and shut case. "He's late," Richard grumbled, checking his gold Rolex. 5 minutes. Disrespectful. "Patience, Richard," Davies counseled, though he too was annoyed. "Let's not give them any ammunition to claim we're being hostile." "Them?" Clara asked with a laugh. "There is no them. It's just Ethan. Who is he going to bring? His therapist?" Right on cue, the door opened. A young associate held it open, and Ethan walked in. He was alone. He was dressed in a simple, perfectly tailored dark gray suit, a white shirt, and no tie. The outfit was a masterpiece of understated elegance. It made Richard's flashy pinstripes and gold watch look suddenly vulgar. Ethan's calm was palpable. It wasn't the calm of defeat, it was the calm of absolute certainty. He carried a thin, leather-bound portfolio under his arm, not the blue folder Clara had given him. "Ethan, glad you could make it," Davies said, his tone professionally neutral, but edged with impatience. "Please, have a seat. We were just about to start without you." Ethan walked to the opposite side of the long table and took a seat directly across from Clara. He placed his portfolio on the table, but did not open it. He met Clara's smug gaze with a look of placid neutrality. "I apologize for my tardiness," Ethan said, his voice filling the room. "I was on a call with Zurich." The statement was so unexpected, so out of character for the man they thought they knew, that it created a momentary silence. Richard almost scoffed. "Zurich? What business could Ethan possibly have with Zurich?" Davies decided to ignore it and get back on script. "Right. Well, let's get started. My client has filed for a no-fault dissolution of marriage. We've proposed a settlement that is, in my professional opinion, exceedingly generous." He slid a copy of the agreement across the table. "We've offered your client, or well, you, full equity in the marital apartment, a 50-50 split of liquid assets, and no further claims on future earnings. It's a clean break." Ethan didn't look at the paper. His eyes remained on Davies. "A clean break," he repeated softly. "Is that what you call it?" "It's the legal term," Davies said, a bit defensively. "Look, Mr. Vance." "My name is Ethan," he corrected gently. "Vance is a family name, on my mother's side." Clara rolled her eyes. "Oh, here we go. Can we just sign the papers and get this over with?" "In a moment, Clara," Ethan said, his voice still quiet, but now carrying a new edge of authority that made her sit up straight. He turned his attention back to the lawyer. "Mr. Davies, you mentioned a generous offer. Let's talk about generosity. Let's talk about assets." Davies sighed, the weary sigh of a man dealing with an amateur. "Your wife has provided a full financial disclosure, as have you, in a manner of speaking. A late-model sedan, a joint bank account, some personal effects. There isn't much to discuss." "Isn't there?" Ethan asked. He finally looked down at the documents in front of him. He didn't open them. He simply rested his hand on the cover. "Did you read the entire document, Mr. Davies? Every page? Every addendum?" Davies stiffened. The question was an insult to his professionalism. "Of course I did. It's my job." Then you must have noted the Addendum 7A, filed under premarital assets and trusts, Ethan continued, his voice as smooth as polished stone. It's on page 7. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Davies's face. He remembered the section. It had been dense, filled with impenetrable legalese about trusts and holding companies. He had skimmed it, assuming it was irrelevant boilerplate, perhaps some small inheritance Ethan was trying to shield. No one ever put anything important in the addenda. Richard, sensing weakness, jumped in. What is this nonsense? What trust? The man doesn't have a trust fund. I've seen his tax returns. He makes less than my driver. Ethan ignored him. His focus was entirely on the lawyer. Page 7, Mr. Davies. I believe it warrants a closer look. Perhaps you should read it now. Aloud, if you please, for the benefit of your clients. There was a challenge in his voice, quiet but unmistakable. A gauntlet had been thrown down. Clara and Richard looked confused, but Davies felt a cold knot of dread begin to form in his stomach. He had been a lawyer for 30 years. He knew the feeling of a case about to go sideways. He knew the smell of a trap just before it was sprung. With a sense of foreboding, he reached for his own copy of the filing. His fingers, usually so steady, fumbled slightly as he flipped through the pages. The room was silent, the only sound the rustle of paper. He found the page. Page 7, Addendum 7A. He began to read. The silence in the room stretched, becoming taut and heavy, like a string pulled to its breaking point. Mr. Davies stared at the page, his confident, professional mask slowly dissolving. His eyes, which had been dismissive just moments before, were now wide with a dawning horror. He read the first line, then his eyes darted down the page, scanning, connecting dots, the full, catastrophic picture assembling itself in his brilliant legal mind. Clara, oblivious, shifted impatiently. Well, what does it say? Is he trying to claim the toaster oven is a premarital asset? She asked with a sarcastic little laugh. Richard grunted in agreement. Get on with it, Davies. Our time is valuable. But Davies didn't seem to hear them. His face had gone pale, a sickly, chalky white. A fine sheen of sweat appeared on his brow. He swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. He looked up from the paper, not at Ethan, but at Clara and Richard, and they saw a look of pure, unadulterated panic. What is it? Richard demanded, his voice rising. What's on that page? Ethan leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped on the table. Please, Mr. Davies, he said, his voice a low, steady anchor in the swirling confusion. Do read it. Your clients are curious. Davies took a shaky breath. He began to read aloud, his voice a hoarse, strangled whisper, a stark contrast to his usual booming courtroom delivery. Addendum 7A, Declaration of Premarital Assets held by Ethan Vance under the E. Vance Irrevocable Trust, established May 4, 2010. He paused, the date hanging in the air. 2010. 2 years before Clara had even met Ethan. 2 years before the humble architect had entered her life. He continued, his voice gaining a note of disbelief with each word. Assets include, but are not limited to, 100% ownership of the Vance Architectural Group, a privately held firm with a current valuation of... Davies stopped. He couldn't say the number. It was too large, too astronomical. It made the Ashworth's entire net worth look like a rounding error. Go on, Mr. Davies, Ethan urged gently. Davies licked his lips. A current valuation of $950 million. The number landed in the room with a physical impact. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Richard froze, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. Julian, had he been there, would have finally stopped smirking. But Davies wasn't finished. The list of horrors continued. Majority shareholder, 58%. In the Apex Holdings Corporation, Richard's head snapped up. Apex Holdings? That's impossible. They're a shell corporation, an investment ghost. His voice trailed off as the implication hit him. Apex Holdings was the anonymous entity that had recently acquired the primary debt of his company, Ashworth Development. He had been celebrating the new favorable lending terms just last week. Davies's voice was barely audible now. Owner of commercial and residential properties managed by the Argent real estate portfolio, including, but not limited to, he read a list of addresses, a litany of the most prestigious properties in the city. He read the address of the very building they were sitting in. He read the address of the Westfield Tower project, the one Clara's new boyfriend was so desperate to land. And then he read the final, devastating line. And the private residential property located at 1422 Silverwood Drive. Clara's face went from shocked to confused. 1422 Silverwood Drive? That's our house. She looked at Ethan. Our apartment. You own it. I thought we had a mortgage. The mortgage is with Argent Financial, a subsidiary of Argent Real Estate, Ethan explained calmly. The monthly payments were a transfer from one account to another, a formality. Davies let the paper fall from his trembling hand. It fluttered onto the table. He stared at Ethan, and for the first time, he truly saw him. He saw the power, the immense, terrifying, silent power that had been sitting across from him all along. He saw a man who had been playing a different game, on a different level, a game so complex that Davies and his clients hadn't even known they were pieces on the board. The lawyer understood everything in that instant. The quiet demeanor, the simple car, the years of enduring condescension. It wasn't weakness, it was camouflage. It was the ultimate power move, the power to be completely underestimated. He looked at Clara's crimson suit, at Richard's gold watch, at their smug, arrogant faces, now slack with shock. And he realized he had been sitting on the wrong side of the table. He had been hired to crush a gnat, and he had just discovered the gnat was a dragon in disguise. A very patient, very intelligent dragon who now owned his client's debt, their headquarters, their future, and their past. And he, their lawyer, had just tried to offer that dragon a toaster oven. Mr. Davies slowly pushed his chair back from the table, the scraping sound unnaturally loud in the dead silence of the room. He stood up, his movements stiff and robotic. He smoothed down his suit jacket, a reflexive gesture of a man trying to regain some semblance of control in a world that had suddenly tilted on its axis. "Excuse me," he said, his voice raspy. He didn't look at Clara or Richard. He couldn't. His gaze was fixed on a point on the far wall, as if he were trying to solve a complex legal problem in his head. The problem was simple: how to extricate himself from this professional disaster with his career intact. He walked to the door, opened it, and stepped out into the hallway, closing it softly behind him. Clara and Richard stared at the closed door, then back at Ethan, their minds struggling to process the cataclysmic shift that had just occurred. What was that?" Clara stammered, her voice small. Is that true, Ethan?" Ethan didn't answer her. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable. In the hallway, Davies leaned against the wall, his heart pounding in his chest. He pulled out his phone, his thumb swiping frantically across the screen. He found the number he was looking for, his firm's senior partner, Jonathan Albright. "Jonathan," he said, his voice low and urgent the moment the call connected. "We have a problem, a big one, the Ashworth divorce." He listened for a moment, then cut in. No, you don't understand. It's a catastrophe. The husband, he's not who they said he was." Davies paced the length of the hallway, his voice a frantic whisper. "He's Vance. The Vance. The architect. No, the owner of the entire goddamn group. Yes, that one. And Apex Holdings. And Argent. Jonathan, he owns the building we're in. We're paying him rent." There was a long pause as the senior partner absorbed the information. Davies could practically hear the gears of a 70-year-old legal mind grinding, calculating liability, exposure, reputational damage. Did they disclose this to you? Albright's voice was sharp, cutting through the panic. No, they painted him as a penniless loser. They lied, Jonathan. They lied through omission on a catastrophic scale. They sent me into a nuclear board meeting with a squirt gun. He ran a hand through his perfectly coiffed silver hair, messing it up for the first time in years. The prenup addendum. It was a trap, a beautifully constructed, legally airtight trap, and we walked right into it. What does he want? Albright asked. He hasn't said, Davies admitted. That's the terrifying part. He's just sitting in there, watching them drown. He's been playing dumb for 5 years. This isn't a divorce, Jonathan. It's a corporate takeover disguised as a family drama. Conflict of interest, Albright stated, the conclusion immediate and absolute. We can't represent her. We can't be seen to be acting against the interests of a man who is, for all intents and purposes, our landlord and the primary financial backer of half our corporate clients. We have to withdraw. Immediately. My thoughts exactly, Davies said, a wave of relief washing over him. He had his out. Do it now, Albright commanded. Be professional. State the conflict. Do not offer any further advice. Do not apologize. Just get out. And Davies, pray he's feeling merciful. The line went dead. Davies took one more deep, steadying breath. He straightened his tie, smoothed his hair, and composed his face into a mask of grim professionalism. He opened the conference room door and stepped back inside. Clara and Richard looked at him with desperate, pleading eyes. They saw him as their savior, their champion, the man who would fix this. They were about to be sorely disappointed. Mr. Davies, Richard began, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. You need to do something. This is fraud. He's been lying to us for years. Davies walked to his seat, but he did not sit down. He gathered his briefcase and his papers, his movements deliberate and final. Upon review of new information that has come to light, he announced, his voice cold and formal, specifically regarding undisclosed financial entanglements between the opposing party and this firm's broader client base, a significant and non-waivable conflict of interest has been identified. He paused, letting the legal jargon sink in. Therefore, effective immediately, the firm of Davies, Albright, and Finch is withdrawing its representation of Mrs. Clara Ashworth in this matter. We will no longer be acting as her counsel. Clara's jaw dropped. What? You can't. You work for me. No, Davies said, turning to look at her directly for the first time since he'd re-entered the room. His eyes were like chips of ice. I work for my firm, and my firm works to protect its own interests. You have put us in an untenable position. He snapped his briefcase shut. As a professional courtesy, I would advise you to cease all aggressive litigation and seek an amicable settlement, he said, the words carefully chosen. Though I am no longer your lawyer, and this does not constitute legal advice. He then leaned in slightly, and his voice dropped to a whisper only Clara and Richard could hear. Off the record? Start begging. It's the only card you have left to play. And with that, he turned on his heel and walked out of the room, leaving a stunned, echoing silence in his wake. He didn't look back. The door closed, and Clara and Richard were left alone, abandoned, staring across the vast, mahogany table at the quiet man they had so thoroughly, so completely, so catastrophically underestimated. The last pillar of their arrogant world had just crumbled to dust. The click of the door closing behind Mr. Davies was the loudest sound Clara had ever heard. It was the sound of a drawbridge being raised, a lifeboat being cast off, a world ending. The silence that followed was thick with the wreckage of their assumptions. Richard Ashworth, a man who had commanded boardrooms and bent politicians to his will, sat slumped in his chair, his face the color of old parchment. The gold Rolex on his wrist, once a symbol of his power, now seemed like a cheap, gaudy handcuff. Clara turned her wide, terrified eyes to Ethan. The calm, placid man she had married was gone. Or rather, she was seeing him for the first time, stripped of the filter of her own condescension. The stillness was still there, but it was no longer the stillness of a pond. It was the stillness of a thunderhead, pregnant with immense waiting power. "Ethan," she whispered, the name a question, an accusation, a plea. "Why?" Ethan finally opened the leather portfolio he had brought. He slid a single, slim tablet across the polished table. It stopped directly in front of Richard. On the screen was a logo, Apex Holdings. "Apex Holdings," Ethan said, his voice even and measured, "acquired the outstanding debt of Ashworth Development 3 months ago. Your primary lender was facing a liquidity crisis. I provided a solution." Richard stared at the screen. He remembered the call, the relief he had felt. The new terms were better, the interest rate lower. He had thought it was a stroke of good luck, a sign that the universe was rewarding his genius. You, you gave us better terms," Richard stammered, confused. "I did," Ethan agreed. "It was a test. I wanted to see what you would do with a second chance, if you would show any humility, if you would perhaps reconsider your aggressive, unsustainable expansion plans. Instead, you took the extra capital and leveraged it into a new, high-risk commercial development, the one in the East Quarter." How, how do you know about that?" Richard asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Because I also own the land it's being built on," Ethan said simply, "through a subsidiary of Argent Real Estate. The land you are currently leasing with an ironclad 99-year contract that has a moral turpitude clause." He gestured vaguely toward the divorce papers. "I suspect filing a frivolous and malicious divorce action in a public and humiliating manner would qualify." Richard looked like he had been punched in the stomach. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Ethan then turned his gaze to Clara. It was not a look of anger or triumph. It was one of deep, profound sorrow. "You ask me why, Clara. For 5 years I have been a guest in your life, in your family's world. I was told my values were quaint, my ambitions were insufficient, my character was lacking. I was told that success was measured in dollars and public acclaim." He paused, letting the words settle. "So I decided to conduct an experiment. I wanted to know if it was possible to have all the money and power in the world and still be a good person. If it was possible to be loved for who I was, not for what I had." He slid the tablet towards her. A series of photographs appeared on the screen. A small, rural clinic in Africa. A newly built school in a forgotten inner-city neighborhood. A beautiful, serene public park where a concrete wasteland used to be. In the corner of each architectural rendering, almost invisible, were the initials E.V. "This is what I do with my time, Clara. This is what I do with my money. This is the ambition you and your father found so lacking. I don't build monuments to corporate vanity. I build hospitals. I build schools. I build communities." Tears began to well in Clara's eyes, but they were not tears of remorse. They were tears of pure, selfish terror. Her mind was reeling, not with the revelation of his philanthropy, but with the scale of her miscalculation. The man she had mocked, the man she had thrown away like garbage, could have given her the world. A world far grander than the petty social circles she had been so desperate to conquer. "And you, Clara," Ethan continued, his voice losing its gentle, explanatory tone and taking on a harder edge of judgment. "I gave you 5 years. 5 years to defend me once, to tell your father to stop, to tell your brother his insults were not welcome, to see one single thing in me worth valuing besides a bank statement. You never did." He stood up, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the table. "The divorce will proceed, but not on your terms, on mine. The petition you filed is void. My lawyer, my real lawyer, Marcus Thorne, will be in touch with a new proposal." He walked towards the door. "Wait!" Clara cried out, a raw, desperate sound. "Ethan, please, I didn't know. I love you." Ethan stopped, his hand on the doorknob, but he did not turn around. The words, "I love you," hung in the air, hollow and meaningless. An 11th hour bid from a bankrupt soul. "No, Clara," he said, his back still to her. "You love what you think I can give you now. You love the idea of me as a project you could fix. You love the idea of Mark as a partner who could advance you. You have never, in all the time I have known you, loved a person. You have only ever loved a position." He opened the door. "The apartment is yours. Keep it. Consider it a parting gift. For your time." He threw her own words back at her, not with malice, but with a devastating finality. Then he was gone, leaving Clara and her father alone in the silent, opulent tomb of their own making, the full, crushing weight of their consequences just beginning to settle upon them. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in silent, systematic dismantling. Ethan did not need to be cruel. He simply needed to let gravity take its course. The intricate web of power and influence he had secretly controlled was now being revealed, not through overt action, but through its sudden, pointed absence. The first domino was Richard Ashworth. The moral turpitude clause in his land lease contract was invoked. It wasn't a public spectacle. It was a quiet, legally airtight letter from a law firm whose name Richard had never heard of, but whose power was immediately apparent. The financing for his high-risk East Quarter development evaporated overnight. The project collapsed, taking with it millions in investor capital and leaving Ashworth Development teetering on the brink of insolvency. When Richard desperately called his contacts at the bank, the men he had played golf with for years, he was met with polite but firm refusals. No one would touch him. The word was out. Richard Ashworth had made an enemy of someone he shouldn't have. No one knew who it was, only that they were powerful enough to turn off the city's financial taps with a single phone call. The second domino was Julian. An anonymous tip to the board of his father's company triggered an internal audit of his department. The investigation revealed years of gross incompetence, inflated expense reports, and sweetheart deals given to his unqualified friends. He wasn't just fired, he was disgraced, forced to pay back tens of thousands of dollars in misappropriated funds. Stripped of his title and expense account, he was just another arrogant, unskilled man with no prospects. He tried to leverage the Ashworth name, only to find it was now a liability, a mark of disgrace. The third domino was the family's social standing. Eleanor Ashworth, who had ruled her charity committees and social clubs with an iron fist, suddenly found her calls going unanswered. Invitations to galas and fundraisers mysteriously stopped arriving. When she attended the annual museum benefit, a party she had chaired the previous year, she was treated with a chilling politeness. People were cordial, but their eyes were distant. They spoke to her, but they were looking over her shoulder for someone more important. She had been rendered invisible, a ghost at the feast. The wealth they had so proudly displayed was revealed to be a fragile facade, and without it, they were nothing. Through it all, Clara was in a state of suspended panic. Her new man, Mark, had disappeared the moment the rumors about the Ashworth's fall from grace began to circulate. His calls became less frequent, then stopped altogether. When she saw him at a restaurant, he pretended not to know her. He was a winner, and she was now firmly associated with losing. She was left with the apartment, the one Ethan had so generously let her keep. It now felt like a prison. Every object in it was a reminder of her monumental foolishness. She tried to contact Ethan, leaving a string of increasingly desperate voicemails. They started as angry accusations, then morphed into tearful apologies, and finally devolved into pathetic, incoherent pleas. He never responded. Finally, after a month of silence, she received a letter. It was from Marcus Thorne's office. It contained the new divorce settlement. It was, to her astonishment, incredibly fair. He wasn't taking anything from her. He was simply dissolving their legal connection. The apartment was legally signed over to her, no strings attached. The joint account was hers to keep. He made no claim on her. He was simply letting her go. Attached to the legal documents was a single, handwritten note on thick, creamy stationery. It was from Ethan. Clara, I am not your enemy. I never was. The consequences your family is facing are not my revenge. They are the natural result of a structure built on a rotten foundation. I simply stopped holding it up. Your father's business was a house of cards. Your brother's career was a fiction. Your family's social standing was purchased, not earned. I have taken nothing from you that was ever truly yours. I hope in time you can build something real. Ethan. Reading the note, Clara finally broke. The tears that came were not for the loss of the money or the status. They were tears of true, soul-crushing shame. For the first time, she saw the depth of her own shallowness. She had been offered a kingdom of genuine worth, of kindness, integrity, and purpose, and she had traded it all for a handful of glittering, worthless trinkets. She finally found him a week later. She had a friend who worked in city planning, and after much begging, discovered the location of his current project. It was in the most run-down part of the city, a place she had only ever driven through with her windows rolled up. He was standing on a vacant, debris-strewn lot, a place that smelled of decay and neglect. He wasn't in a suit. He was wearing jeans, a simple work shirt, and boots caked in mud. He was holding a set of rolled-up blueprints and talking to a group of local residents, his head bent, listening intently to an elderly woman who was gesturing animatedly. Clara got out of her car and walked towards him, feeling utterly out of place in her designer clothes. He saw her coming. He didn't smile, but he didn't look away. He politely excused himself from the group and walked to meet her halfway. "What are you doing here, Clara?" he asked, his voice not unkind. "This is it?" she asked, looking around at the urban blight. "This is your grand project?" "This," he said, his eyes glowing with a passion she had never seen before, "is going to be the Phoenix Center, a community hub, a library, a daycare, a job training facility, and low-income housing. It's my masterpiece." She looked at him, at the genuine joy on his face, and she finally understood. His wealth wasn't in his bank account, it was in his purpose. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and for the first time she meant it. "I was a fool." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, his gaze searching. He saw the cracks in her perfect facade, the genuine remorse in her eyes. He gave a small, sad nod. "Yes," he said softly, "you were, but it's not too late to stop being one." He didn't offer forgiveness. He didn't offer a second chance. He offered something more valuable, the truth. He was giving her the dignity of facing her own choices and the challenge of building a new life from the rubble of the old one. He turned and walked back to the group of residents, leaving her standing alone in the middle of the vacant lot at the very beginning of a long, difficult road to redemption. 1 year later, the Phoenix Center stood as a testament to Ethan's vision. It was a soaring, beautiful structure of glass, recycled steel, and warm wood, a beacon of hope in the heart of a neighborhood that had been forgotten for decades. Children's laughter echoed from the playground where a derelict building once stood. The library was full. People were finding work, finding community, finding hope. Ethan was on the rooftop garden, sketching in his worn leather journal. He was no longer anonymous. The Phoenix Center project had, against his wishes, put him in the spotlight. But he had found a way to use the attention, redirecting it towards the causes he championed. He had found a balance between his private world and his public responsibilities. He was at peace. Down in the city below, the Ashworths had found a new kind of equilibrium. Their empire was gone, their fortunes spent on legal fees and bad debts. They lived in a modest townhouse, a significant downgrade from their former mansion, but a home nonetheless. Richard, stripped of his company, had taken a consulting job. He was humbled, quieter. He had lost everything he thought mattered, only to find that his wife and daughter still spoke to him. He was learning, slowly and painfully, the difference between net worth and self-worth. Eleanor, without her charities and galas, had started volunteering at the Phoenix Center's daycare. At first, it was a desperate attempt to get close to Ethan, to plead her family's case. But surrounded by the unfiltered honesty of children, something within her began to thaw. She discovered a capacity for nurturing she never knew she had. She was still Eleanor Ashworth, but the name no longer felt like a title. It just felt like a name. And Clara. She had sold the apartment and used the money to go back to school, studying social work. She was working an internship at a women's shelter. It was hard, emotionally draining work. It paid almost nothing. She had never been happier. She occasionally saw Ethan at fundraisers or city events. They would exchange a polite, distant nod. There was no lingering bitterness, but there was no reconciliation either. Their shared past was a scar, a reminder of a lesson learned at a terrible cost. She was building something real, just as he had challenged her to do. It wasn't the life she had planned, but it was, for the first time, a life that was truly her own. Ethan closed his journal. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the city he had, in his own quiet way, helped to shape. He had learned that true power wasn't the ability to crush your enemies, but the wisdom to let them find their own path to redemption. Justice wasn't about revenge, it was about balance restored. He had faced the arrogance of the world and had met it not with a louder roar, but with a quieter, more profound strength. He had proven that a person's value is not in their portfolio, but in their principles, not in what they own, but in what they build, not in who knows their name, but in the lives they have quietly, patiently, and lovingly changed for the better. What do you think? Is this a story of revenge or a story of justice? Sometimes the line is thin. The truth is, people who build their lives on a foundation of arrogance and disrespect are living in a house that's bound to collapse. All it takes is for one person to stop holding up the walls for them. Have you ever had to be that person? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for being here with me for this story. If you felt that moment of satisfaction when page 7 was read, if you believe that integrity is the ultimate superpower, then please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. There are so many more stories of quiet strength and loud consequences to tell, and I can't wait to share them with you. Until next time, remember to be the person who sees the value in others, not the price tag.